Hey guys, it's KJ from the Scariest Movie Ever channel on YouTube. I got a video here that I've really been meaning to make for quite a while. I think the information that's inside this book right here, Thanks for the Memories by Brice Taylor, is key information. It's key information to anybody out there who wants to understand what's really going on around them and the way the world's really being run, specifically in relation to entertainment and politics. This stuff extends to the highest branches, to the very top of that Illuminati pyramid. It's all there. I read this book many years ago, Thanks for the Memories by Brice Taylor. This was during the process years ago when I was still trying to figure things out a little more. I mean, I'm still trying to figure things out now, but this was like in the first year or so. And since reading this book, I've found that this basically has been my anchor. I can always go back to it and reference it. And since reading it, it really opened my eyes in a huge way. And I think after you see this video and after you hear some of the things that come out of this book, I think it's going to do the same for you if you're not already there. It's really going to show you the way things are working around us, specifically in entertainment and politics. It's also going to show you just how widespread mind control is. I'm not actually going to be reading this whole book or anything to you. To do that, it would be a video that would take like hours to do. I will, however, leave a PDF link underneath the video to the book if you'd like to check it out. I highly recommend it. It'll definitely clear a lot of things up for you, that's for sure. The part from this book that I want to share from you is actually from the very beginning. It's from a researcher and an author named Ron Patton. Now remember that this book and everything in it was written many, many years ago. A lot of the things referenced in this book actually took place like in the 50s and 60s and on. So this whole thing, this mind control setup has been around for a very, very, very long time. And you can only imagine that if they were talking about this kind of stuff back then, wow, just imagine what they're doing now. And actually, I think we're seeing the fruits of that in all of our modern entertainment. I mean, just look at how obviously satanic it's become and in your face and hypersexualized. All that relates back to this. You're going to see. So the part that I'm going to be reading to you actually it's the very beginning of the book, and it's from Ron Patton. It's called Project Monarch, Nazi Mind Control. And essentially what he does here is he breaks down the whole history of this monarch mind control and how it started with the Nazis, actually worked its way here into America, specifically into the entertainment industry in a really, really big way. You know, and keep in mind too, another thing that this kind of information is going to show you is that, you know, if you are already, please don't hate all these so-called Illuminati artists. You know, we see a lot of these artists doing all this stuff that's obviously Illuminati symbols, and again, the hypersexualization and a lot of really gross stuff too, right? They really are puppets. They're abused and they need our prayers. Project Monarch, Nazi Mind Control by Ron Patton. Amidst the subtle cerebral circumvention of the gullible populace through a multitude of manipulated mediums lies one of the most diabolical atrocities perpetrated upon a segment of the human race. A form of systematic mind control which has permeated every aspect of society for almost 50 years. To objectively ascertain the following, one may need to re-examine preconceived ideologies relating to the dualistic nature of mankind. Resolving the philosophical question of whether we are inherently good or inherently evil is tantamount in shaping our perception of reality, specifically the spiritual variable within the equation of life. This exposition is substantiated by declassified U.S. government documents, individuals formally connected to the U.S. intelligence communities, and historical researchers knowledgeable in mind control, from publications, from mental health practitioners, even interviews taken from survivors unwittingly subjected to a highly complex form of trauma-based mind control, known as monarch programming. A word of caution for survivors of intensely systematic mind control and or some form of ritualized abuse. There are numerous triggers in this article. It is therefore recommended not to read it unless appropriate support systems are in place or if you have a thoroughly reintegrated personality. A brief history of control. The mystery religions of ancient Egypt, Greece, India, and Babylon helped lay the foundation for occultism, meaning hidden knowledge, One of the earliest writings giving reference to occultism is the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It's a compilation of rituals, explicitly describing methods of torture and intimidation to create trauma. The use of potions, different drugs, the casting of spells, hypnotism, ultimately resulting in the total enslavement of the initiate. These have been the main ingredients for a part of occultism known as Satanism throughout the ages. During the 13th century, the Roman Catholic Church increased and solidified its dominion throughout Europe with the infamous Inquisition. Satanism survived this period of persecution, deeply entrenching itself under the veil of various esoteric groups. In 1776, a Bavarian Jesuit by the name of Adam Weishaupt was commissioned by the House of Rothschild to centralize the power base of the mystery religions into what is commonly known as the Illuminati, meaning the Enlightened Ones. This was an amalgamation of powerful occultic bloodlines, elite secret societies, and influential Masonic fraternities, with the desire to construct the framework for a new world order. The outward goal of this utopia was to bring forth universal happiness to the human race. However, their underlying intention was to gradually increase control over the masses, thus becoming masters of the planet. By the 19th century, Great Britain and Germany were recognized as the primary geographic areas of Illuminati control. It then should be of little surprise to know the first work in behavioral science research was established in England in 1882, while most of the early medical and psychiatric techniques involved in mind control were pioneered at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany. The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations was set up in London in 1921 to study the breaking point of humans. Kurt Lewin, a German psychologist, became the director of the Tavistock Institute in 1932. About the same time, Nazi Germany was increasing its research into neuropsychology, parapsychology, and multi-generational occultism. Interestingly, a progressive exchange of scientific ideas was taking place between England and Germany, most notably in the field of eugenics. The movement devoted to improving, quote-unquote, the human species through the control of hereditary factors and mating. The nefariously enigmatic union between the two countries was bonded, partly through the Order of the Golden Dawn, a secret society which consisted of many high-ranking officials in the Nazi Party and British aristocracy. Top SS Nazi officer Heinrich Himmler was in charge of a scientific project called Lebensborn, which included selective breeding and adoption of children, a peculiarly large number of twins among them. The purpose of the program was to create a super race, or Aryans, who would have total allegiance to the cause of the Third Reich, or the New World Order at that time. Much of the preliminary experimentation concerning genetic engineering and behavior modifications was conducted by Dr. Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz, where he coldly analyzed the effects of trauma bonding, eye coloring, and twinning upon his victims. Besides the insidious surgical experimentation performed at the concentration camp, some of the children were subjected to massive amounts of electroshock. Now, sadly, many of them did not survive the brutality. Concurrently, brainwashing was carried out on inmates at Dachau who were placed under hypnosis and given the hallucinogenic drug mescaline. Now, during the war, parallel behavior research was led by Dr. George Estabrook of Colgate University. His involvement with the Army, CID, FBI, and other agencies remains shrouded in secrecy. However, Estabrook would occasionally slip and discuss his work involving the creation of hypno-programmed couriers and hypnotically induced split personalities. After World War II, the U.S. Department of Defense secretly imported many of the top German Nazi and Italian fascist scientists and spies into the United States via South America and the Vatican. The code name for this operation was Project Paperclip. One of the more prominent finds for the U.S. was German General Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's chief of intelligence against Russia. Upon arriving in Washington, D.C. in 1945, Galen met extensively with President Truman, General William Wild Bill Donovan, Director of the Office of Strategic Services, and Alan Dulles, who would later become the stalwart head of the CIA. The objective of their brainstorming sessions was to reorganize the nominal American intelligence operation, transforming it into a highly efficient covert organization. The culmination of their efforts produced the Central Intelligence Group in 1946, renamed the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947. Richard Galen also had profound influence in helping to create the National Security Council, from which the National Security Act of 1947 was derived. This particular piece of legislation was implemented to protect an unconscionable number of illegal government activities, including clandestine mind control programs. With the CIA and National Security Council firmly established, the first in a series of covert brainwashing programs was initiated by the Navy in the fall of 1947. Project Chatter was developed in response to the Soviet successes through the use of truth drugs. This rationale, however, was simply a cover story if the program were to be exposed. The research focused on the identification and testing of such drugs for use in interrogations and the recruitment of agents. The project was officially terminated in 1953. The CIA decided to expand their efforts in the area of behavior modification with the advent of Project Bluebird, approved by director Alan Dulles in 1950. Its objectives were to discover a means of conditioning personnel to prevent unauthorized extraction of information from them by known means. Also to investigate the possibility of control of an individual by application of special interrogation techniques, and to investigate memory enhancement and establish defensive means for preventing hostile control of agency personnel. In August 1951, Project Bluebird was renamed Project Artichoke, which evaluated offensive uses of interrogation techniques including hypnosis and drugs. The program ceased in 1956. 3 years prior to the halt of Project Artichoke, Project MK-Ultra came into existence on April 13, 1953, along the lines proposed by Richard Helms, Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, with the rationale of establishing a special funding mechanism of extreme sensitivity. The hypothetical etymology of MK may possibly stand for mind control. The obvious post-war translation of the German word control into English is control. A host of German doctors procured from the Nazi talent pool were an invaluable asset toward the development of MKUltra. The correlation between the concentration camp experiments and the numerous sub-projects of MKUltra are clearly evident. The various avenues used to control human behavior under MKUltra included radiation, electroshock, psychology, psychiatry, sociology, anthropology, graphology, harassment substances, and paramilitary devices and materials, LSD being the most widely dispensed material. A special procedure designated MK-Delta was established to govern the use of MKUltra abroad. MKUltra or MK-Delta materials were used for harassment, discrediting, or even disabling purposes. Of the 149 sub-projects under the umbrella of MKUltra having been identified, Project Monarch officially began by the U.S. Army in the early 1960s, although unofficially implemented much earlier. It appears to be the most prominent and is still classified as top secret for national security reasons. But Monarch may have culminated from MK Search sub-projects such as Operation Spellbinder, which was set up to create sleeper assassins or Manchurian candidates who could be activated upon receiving a keyword or phrase while in a post-hypnotic trance. Operation Often is another one, and it was a study which attempted to harness the power of occultic forces. It was possibly one of several cover programs to hide the insidious reality of Project Monarch. The name monarch is not necessarily defined within the context of royal nobility, but rather refers to the monarch butterfly. When a person is undergoing trauma induced by electroshock, a feeling of lightheadedness is evidenced. as if one is floating or fluttering like a butterfly. There is also a symbolic representation pertaining to the transformation or metamorphosis of this beautiful insect, from a caterpillar to a cocoon, dormancy to inactivity, to a butterfly, a new creation, which will return to its point of origin. Such is the migratory pattern that makes this species unique. Occultic symbols may give additional insight into the true meaning. Psyche is the word for both soul and butterfly, coming from the belief that human souls become butterflies while searching for a new reincarnation. Some ancient mystical groups, such as the Gnostics, saw the butterfly as a symbol of corrupt flesh. The angel of death in Gnostic artworks was portrayed crushing the butterfly. A marionette is a puppet that is attached to strings and is controlled by the puppet master. Hence, monarch programming is also referred to as the marionette syndrome. Imperial conditioning is another term used, while some mental health therapists know it as conditioned stimulus response sequences. Project Monarch could best be described as a form of trauma-structured disassociation and occultic integration in order to compartmentalize the mind into multiple personalities within a systematic framework. During the process, a satanic ritual, usually including Kabbalistic mysticism, is performed with the purpose of attaching a particular demon or group of demons to the corresponding altars. Now, of course, most people would view this as simply a means to enhance trauma within the victim, negating a rational belief that demonic possession actually occurs. Another way of examining this convoluted victimization of body and soul is by looking at it as a complex computer program. A file or an altar is created through trauma, repetition, and reinforcement. In order to activate or trigger that file, a specific access code or password, a cue or command, is required. The victim survivor is called a slave by the programmer or handler, who in turn is perceived as a master or god. About 75% are female, since they possess a higher tolerance for pain and they tend to disassociate a lot easier than the males. Subjects are used mainly for covert operations, prostitution and pornography, and involvement in the entertainment industry in general. A former military officer connected to the DIA told this writer, "In the big picture, these people, these monarch victims, are in all walks of life, from the bum on the street to the white-collar guy." In corroboration, a retired CIA agent vaguely discussed the use of such personnel to be used as plants or chameleons for the purpose of infiltrating a designated group, gathering information, and/or injecting an ulterior agenda. There are an inordinate amount of altars from victim to survivor, with numerous backup programs, mirrors, and shadows. A division of light side good and dark side bad altars are interwoven in the mind, and they rotate on an axis. One of the main internal structures, of which there are many, within this system is shaped like a double helix, consisting of 7 levels. Each system has an internal programmer who oversees the gatekeepers, or demons, I wonder, who grant or deny entry into the different rooms. A few of the internal images predominantly seen by victims and survivors are trees, or the Kabbalistic tree of life, with adjoining root systems, infinity loops, ancient symbols and letters, spider webs, mirrors or glass shattering, masks, castles, mazes, demons, monsters, aliens, seashells, butterflies, snakes, ribbons, bows, flowers, hourglasses, clocks, robots, chain of command diagrams, and/or schematics of computer circuitry boards. A majority of the victims or survivors come from multi-generational satanic family bloodlines and are ostensibly programmed to fulfill their destiny as the chosen ones, or chosen generations, a term coined by Mengele at Auschwitz. Some are adopted out to families of similar origin. Others used in this neurological nightmare are deemed as the expendable ones, or non-bloodliners, usually coming from orphanages, foster care homes, or incestuous families with a long history of pedophilia. Many of the abused come from families who use Catholicism, Mormonism, or charismatic Christianity as a front for these abominable activities though members of other religious groups are also involved. Oftentimes, victims and survivors generally respond more readily to a rigid religious or like a dogmatic or legalistic hierarchical structure because it parallels their base programming. Authority usually goes unchallenged as their will has been usurped through subjective and command-oriented conditioning. Physical identification characteristics on victims or survivors often include multiple electrical prod scars and/or resultant moles on their skin. A few may have had various parts of their bodies mutilated by knives, branding irons, or needles. Butterfly or occult tattoos are also very, very common, but generally the bloodliners are less likely to have the subsequent markings as their skin is to remain pure and unblemished. The ultimate purpose of the sophisticated manipulation of these individuals may sound unrealistic depending upon our interpretive understanding of the physical and spiritual realms. The deepest and darkest altars within bloodliners are purported to be dormant until the, quote, Antichrist is revealed. These New World Order altars supposedly contain callback orders and instructions to train and/or initiate a large influx of people, possibly clones or soulless ones, thereby stimulating social control programs into the new millennium. Non-biological twinning is yet another bizarre feature observed within monarch programming. For instance, two young non-related children would be ceremoniously initiated in a magical soul bonding type ritual so they might be inseparably paired for eternity. Possibly another Mengele connection? They essentially share two halves of the programmed information, making them interdependent upon one another. Paranormal phenomena such as astral projection, telepathy, ESP, etc., all of these appear to be more pronounced between those who have undergone this process. The gamma level of monarch programming is another form of system protection. It's also considered the deception programming, which elicits misinformation and misdirection. Now, this level is intertwined with demonology and tends to regenerate itself at a later time if inappropriately deactivated. The initial process begins with creating disassociation within the subject, usually occurring from the time of birth to about 6 years. This is primarily achieved through the use of electroshock and is at times performed even when the child is in the mother's womb. Due to the severe trauma induced through ECT, sexual abuse, and other methods, the mind splits off into alternate personalities from the core, formerly referred to as multiple personality disorder. It is presently recognized as dissociative identity disorder, and it's the basis for monarch programming. Now, further conditioning of the victim's mind is enhanced through hypnotism, double-bind coercion, pleasure-pain reversals, food, water, sleep, and sensory deprivation, along with various drugs which alter certain cerebral functions. The next stage is to embed and compress detailed commands or messages within the specified altar. This is achieved through the use of high-tech headsets in conjunction with computer-driven generators which emit inaudible sound waves or harmonics that affect the RNA covering of neuron pathways to the subconscious and unconscious minds. Virtual reality optical devices are sometimes used simultaneously with the harmonic generators projecting pulsating colored lights, subliminals, and screen visuals. High voltage electroshock is then used for memory dissolution. Programming is updated periodically and reinforced through visual, auditory, and written mediums. Some of the first programming themes included The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland, both heavily saturated with occultic symbolism. Many of the recent Disney movies and cartoons are used in a twofold manner, desensitizing the majority of the population using subliminals and neurolinguistic programming and deliberately constructing specific triggers and keys for base programming of highly impressionable monarch children. Music plays an instrumental role in programming through combinations of variable tones, rhythms, and words. Frightmeister Stephen King's numerous novels and subsequent movies are purported by very credible sources to be used for such villainous purposes. On one of his latest books, Insomnia, it's featured a picture of King with the trigger phrase, "We never sleep." It's indicative of someone with MPD or DID, and it's all below an all-seeing eye. It's difficult to figure out who the original programmer of this satanic project was due to the substantial amount of disinformation and cross-contamination propagated by the powers that be. The two that went by the color-coded name of Dr. Green are a Jewish doctor named Dr. Grunbaum, who supposedly collaborated with the Nazis during World War II, and Dr. Joseph Mengele, whose trademark of cold-blooded and calculating brutality has not only scarred the souls of survivors from Auschwitz, but also a countless number of victims throughout the world. Mengele's direct involvement at the infamous Auschwitz concentration camp was suspiciously downplayed during the Nuremberg trials, and consequently, no intensified effort by the U.S. and its allies was ever directed towards his capture. As a means to confuse serious investigators as to his whereabouts, U.S. officials would report Mengele being a non-threatening recluse in Paraguay or Brazil, or that he was simply dead. The angel of death miraculously must have come back to life at least 5 different times, it would seem, because his unprecedented research at the expense of thousands of lives undoubtedly was a significant bonus to U.S. interests. Besides using the pseudonym of Dr. Green, survivors knew him as Vaterchen, or Daddy, Schoner Joseph, Beautiful Joseph, David, and Fairchild. A gracefully handsome man of slight stature, Mengele would disarm people with his gentle demeanor, while at other times he would explode into violent rages. Other characteristics remembered by survivors were the cadence of his shiny black boots as he paced back and forth, and his I love you not daisy game. When he pulled off the last daisy pedal, he would maliciously torture and kill a small child in front of the other child he was programming. Distraught survivors also recalled being thrown naked into cages with monkeys, who were trained to viciously abuse them. Now, evidently, Mengele enjoyed reducing people to this level of animals. He also would purposefully restrain his victims from crying, screaming, or showing any excessive emotion. Besides the conventional methods of psychiatric tyranny such as electroshock, drug injections, and lobotomies, Cameron conceived the technique of psychic driving, wherein unsuspecting patients were kept in a drug-induced coma for several weeks and administered a regimen of electroshocks, while electronic helmets were strapped to their heads, and repetitive auditory messages were transmitted at variable speeds. Many of those exploited were abused children who had been run through the Roman Catholic orphanages system. Not surprisingly, Dr. Cameron has been conveniently left out of most psychiatric journals. This may have been in fact largely due to Project MKUltra being publicly exposed in 1970 through lawsuits filed by Canadian survivors and their families. The CIA and Canadian government settled out of court. A former U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel in the DIA's Psychological Warfare Division, Michael Aquino, is one of the most well-known in the line of alleged government-sponsored sadists. Aquino, an eccentric genius, founded the Temple of Set, an offshoot of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan. His obsession with Nazi pagan rituals and his hypnotic manipulation of people made him an ideal candidate for the position of master programmer. Aquino was connected with the Presidio Army Base daycare scandal, in which he was accused of child molestation. Much to the dismay of the young victim's parents, all charges were dismissed. In order to keep MKUltra from being easily detected, the CIA segmented its sub-projects into specialized fields of research and development at universities, prisons, private laboratories, and hospitals. And of course, they were rewarded generously with government grants and miscellaneous funding. The names and locations of some of the major institutions involved in monarch programming experimentation were and are Cornell, Duke, Princeton, UCLA, University of Rochester, MIT, Georgetown University Hospital, St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., Bell Laboratories, Stanford Research Institute, Westinghouse Friendship Laboratories, General Electric, ARCO, and Man-King Research Unlimited. The final product was and is usually created on military installations and bases where maximum security is required. Referred to as reprogramming centers or near-death trauma centers, the most heavily identified are China Lake Naval Weapons Center, the Presidio, pretty much any Air Force base you can imagine, and the list goes on and on. Other places recognized as major programming sites are Langley Research Center, Los Alamos National Laboratories, the Tavistock Institute, of course, and their areas in or by Mount Shasta. One of the first documented cases of a monarch secret agent was that of the voluptuous 1940s model Candy Jones. The book The Control of Candy Jones portrays her 12 years of intrigue and suspense as a spy for the CIA. Jones, whose birth name is Jessica Wilcox, apparently fit the physiological profile and psychological profile as to be one of the initial experiments or human guinea pigs under the government's, quote, scientific project MKUltra. The most publicized case of monarch monomania has surfaced through the book Transformation of America, the true life story of a CIA slave by Kathy O'Brien. On the back cover, it emphatically states that Kathy O'Brien is the only vocal and recovered survivor of the Central Intelligence Agency's MKUltra Project Monarch mind control operation. This documented autobiography contains compelling amounts of O'Brien's years of unrelenting incest and eventual introduction into Project Monarch by her perverted father. Along with co-author Mark Phillips, her rescuer and deprogrammer, Kathy covers an almost unbelievable array of conspiratorial crime. Dr. Corey Don Hammond, a psychologist from the University of Utah, delivered a stunning lecture entitled Hypnosis in MPD, Ritual Abuse, at the 4th Annual Eastern Regional Conference on Abuse and Multiple Personalities, June 25, 1992, in Alexandria, Virginia. He essentially confirmed the suspicions of the attentive crowd of mental health professionals, wherein a certain percentage of their clients had undergone mind control programming in an intensely systematic manner. Hammond alluded to the Nazi connection, military and CIA mind control research, Greek letter and color programming, and specifically mentioned the Monarch Project in relation to a form of conditioning. Shortly after this groundbreaking speech, he received death threats. Not wanting to jeopardize the safety of his family, Dr. Hammond stopped disseminating any follow-up information. Until recently. New Orleans therapist Valerie Wolf introduced 2 of her patients before the President's Committee on Human Radiation Experiments on March 15, 1995, in Washington, D.C. The astonishing testimony made by these 2 brave women included accounts of German doctors, torture, drugs, electroshock, hypnosis, even rape, besides being exposed to an undetermined amount of radiation. Both Wolf and her patients stated they recovered the memories of this abuse without regression or hypnosis techniques. Wolf presently devotes much of her time to counseling such survivors. A former labor attorney for Atlantic Richfield Company, David E. Rosenbaum, conducted a 9-year investigation concerning allegations of physical torture and coercive conditioning of numerous employees at an Arco plant in Monaca, Pennsylvania. His clients, Jerry L. Doty and Ann White, were victims of an apparent radiation exposure, but as Mr. Rosenbaum probed deeper in the subsequent interview sessions, a real Pandora's box was unveiled. His most astonishing conclusion was that Jerry Doty and Ann White were likely the offspring of Adolf Hitler, based in part on the uncanny resemblance from photos. Facial features, bone structure, and size were taken into consideration, of course, and Rosenbaum also stated that they both exhibited feelings and experiences that indicate they are twins. Doty and White were allegedly subjected to torture of many kinds while under drug-induced hypnosis, with each one undergoing at least 3 training techniques by plant physicians. Each victim was trained to enter into a hypnotic state upon the occurrence of specific stimuli, usually involving a cue word or a phrase, and they were trained to remember to forget such things that transpired in this hypnotic state. They were repeatedly subjected to identical stimulus response sequences to produce nearly automatic reactions to the particular status. MKUltra veterans Dr. Bernard Diamond, Dr. Martin Orney, and Dr. Joseph Mengele regularly visited the Arco plant, according to Rosenbaum. The special conditioning of Doty and White were intended for the artificial creation of dual German personalities. Rosenbaum, who is Jewish, has maintained a deep friendship with the 2 despite the seemingly precarious circumstances. The alpha level of Monarch programming is regarded as general or regular programming within the base control personality. It's characterized by extremely pronounced memory retention, along with substantially increased physical strength and visual acuity. Alpha programming is accomplished through deliberately subdividing the victim's personality, which in essence causes a left brain, right brain style division, allowing for a programmed union of L and R through neuron pathway stimulation. The beta level of Monarch programming is referred to as sexual programming. This programming eliminates all learned moral convictions and stimulates the primitive sexual instincts devoid of inhibitions. Cat alters may come out at this level. The delta level of Monarch programming is known as the killer programming, originally developed for training special agents or elite soldiers, the Delta Force, the 1st Earth Battalion, the Mossad, etc., into covert operations. Now, optimal adrenal output and controlled aggression is very evident here. Subjects are devoid of fear. They're very systematic in carrying out their assignment. Self-destruct or suicide instructions are often layered within this level. The theta level of Monarch programming, considered to be the psychic programming. Bloodliners, those coming from the multi-generational satanic families, were determined to exhibit a greater propensity for having telepathic abilities than did the non-bloodliners. Now, due to its evident limitations, however, various forms of electronic mind control systems were developed and introduced, namely biomedical human telemetry devices or brain implants, directed energy lasers using microwaves and or electromagnetics are used here. It's also reported that these are used in conjunction with highly advanced computers and sophisticated satellite tracking systems. The Omega level of Monarch programming is a self-destruct form of programming. It's also known as Code Green. The corresponding behaviors include suicidal tendencies and or self-mutilation. This program is generally activated when the victim or survivor begins therapy or interrogation and too much memory is starting to become recovered. The Gamma level of Monarch programming is another form of system protection. The most incriminating statement to date made by a government official as to the possible existence of Project Monarch was extracted by Anton Chaikin, a writer for the publication The New Federalist. When former CIA Director William Colby was asked directly, "What about Monarch?" he replied angrily and ambiguously. He said, "We stopped that between the late 1960s and the early 1970s. It will suffice to say that society, in its apparent state of cognitive dissonance, is generally in denial of the overwhelming evidence of this multifarious conspiracy. Numerous victims, survivors of Project Monarch, are in desperate need of help. However, the great majority of people are too preoccupied with themselves to show any genuine compassion toward these severely wounded individuals. Apathy has taken over the minds of the masses who choose to exist within the comforts of this world. Reality has thus become obscured by relativism and selfishness. Although there has been some progress in deprogramming and reintegrating therapies, a much greater problem needs to be rectified. The Holy Bible addresses this problem as the fragmentation of the soul in Ezekiel. A spiritual restoration is what is truly needed. Statistically, the road to recovery for these survivors of unimaginable depravity is a long and tedious one. But God is the ultimate healer, and only within His time, through His strength, and by His grace, can these captives be set free.